warm welcome for Blake Carpenter. Thank you.
It's great seeing so many conservative champions here today. Some of you guys are from the life community. Others I know are champions for the Second Amendment and conservative principles. And Debbie, thank you. Always appreciate you and what the congressman does. Anyways, today I'm going to talk to you guys about the 2024 legislative session and then what happened earlier this week for the special session. It's my understanding that you guys haven't been given any a roundup or wrap-up of the 2024 special session just yet. So I'm going to try to make it through all of these items, and it's pretty extensive. There's probably about 40 slides here. So if I'm going too fast, or if you guys want to ask questions, please do it like while we're going through, if you want, or maybe write it down and save it towards the end, however you guys want to do this. I'm very flexible. So we're going to start at the beginning of the session. We're going to work our way all the way through the special session. So at the State of the State address, the governor told us all to be goldfish. She said, hey, have 10-second memories. Oh, but that mean, nasty man from 7 years ago ruined our state. And so it's very interesting that she tries to tell us to have memories like a goldfish, but then does not practice what she preaches. This was in an effort when she was talking about taxes and, hey, let's forget about all the past things. Let's do what's right for Kansas, so on and so forth. Well, at the same time, we had just gotten campaign finance reports, and she had raised about $1 million for her middle-of-the-road PAC, is what they call it. And this middle-of-the-road PAC is set up for the express purpose to break the Republican supermajorities in the legislature. So she's saying, hey, let's all work together, but at the same time, I'm going to try to crush you in just a few months. So don't worry about that. And so it's suspected now, though, that she's going to have well over $1 million, probably 2, 3, even more. That's going to come in from Washington, D.C., California, and other states from around the country. So I'm hoping that at some point the Pachyderm will have somebody come in and tell you guys about all the legislative races that are going on around the state, but that's a whole nother presentation all of itself. So one big positive out of the 2024 legislative session is that Medicaid expansion, or Obamacare, was defeated again. Yes. So the governor spent many months leading up to the 2024 legislative session trying to apply pressure to every group, entity, hospital, business, even if they have nothing to do with Medicaid expansion, prior to the 2024 legislative session, trying to increase the pressure to have us have a vote and ultimately pass it. Now, again, we could spend an hour just on Medicaid expansion alone, but what I will point you all to is there's a podcast that I actually do called the Kansas Briefing. And after we did this podcast, I realized this is probably the simplest I've ever heard it broken down into in terms of this topic. And so I would encourage all of you to go out there, whether it's Spotify, Apple, whatever you do podcasts on. And it's about 30 minutes long, and it's with the FDA. They're a group that fights for limited government, and so they had Roy Leonardson. I can remember the guy's name, but not the group he works for. And he came in and he talked about Medicaid expansion, and I would encourage you to go listen to this. It's the best 30 minutes ever. Share it with your friends and family. It's worth it. So some of the big bills that we ended up passing this year were, I'm going to start with the stuff that passed, and then I'm going to get into the stuff that either passed or didn't pass due to vetoes. So the first big item is workers' compensation. And so with the workers' compensation issue, it has gone for about a decade plus without any modifications to it. It's because typically in the legislature, this is an extremely controversial subject, and usually what it does is it pairs those who are pro-labor versus pro-business against each other and trying to achieve a better win for one side or the other. And so typically you end up having the Republicans and the Democrats fight each other on this issue and trying to stake out more ground for one side than the other. However, this year, there was labor and business actually came together and they compromised and they said, hey, we know we need to update this, but let's do a little bit of give and take. And so everybody that is out there that has a stake in this came together, they worked together, they wrote the bill and basically said, hey, legislators, we're not going to fight on this. We have a proposed solution, and we reviewed it. Our Commerce Committee reviewed it, and yeah, it was acceptable to all parties involved. So it got passed, and there's quite a bit of stuff in there, as you can tell, but Senate Bill 430. And if you guys want me to go into more specifics on these things, I can. I pass the slides if you'd like, but I'm going to keep pressing just because we have 40 slides. So we had a resolution in the House that was supporting Texas with the enforcement of the southern border this year as well. Unfortunately, as you can see in this picture, there's 13 other governors here, but our governor is not standing there with Governor Abbott. I think we all know the reason why for that. Now, later in the session, there was about $15 million that was added to the budget to send the National Guard to the southern border. The governor vetoed it. She line item vetoed it. And the legislature actually overrode it. So there is currently $15 million appropriated right now in the state budget to send troops to the southern border to help. However, the governor is the commander-in-chief. And so she is the one that actually has the determination or makes that decision on whether or not the troops will or won't go. So while the money is sitting there, it is unlikely to be used. And so that $15 million will probably end up in next year's budget. But that's how that's playing out right now with that issue. So healthcare solutions. There was actually a few things that we did that is going to help our healthcare system without doing the silver magical bullet that is Obamacare. If you hear the governor talk, it can. I'm not going to say what I was going to say. It can basically make it to where it'll cure all government's ailments. It'll make it to where taxes will go down. It'll make it to where, you just name it, Obamacare will basically solve the issue for you. That is not what a lot of us believe on our side, obviously. And so instead of passing Obamacare, what we did was we actually did targeted solutions and spending money where it actually helped alleviate some of the burdens that Obamacare is supposed to be doing. And one of those is increasing the Medicaid reimbursement rates for providers. So we actually added $33.9 million from all funds, and then $13.6 million from the state general fund. So what that means is the state general fund is what we control as a legislature. So if we say, let's say I put $1 million into a pot. Well, there's a lot of times where the federal government has matching dollars, and sometimes it's 1-to-1, sometimes it's 50 cents, other times it's 2-to-1, whatever it is. And so if that's the reason why $13.6 million state general fund, well, the $33.9 million is all funds. So that's money that we can bring down and are bringing down into the program. And so historically, we've had a low reimbursement rate for Medicaid. And so that makes it to where those practices don't really want to accept more Medicaid patients because they are losing money when they accept those patients versus somebody who has insurance. And so this will allow it to where, okay, if we're providing more as far as reimbursement rate goes, then they might be more willing to increase the individuals that they see. And currently, with Medicaid, there's 13 at-risk populations within that group. And so that's pregnant mothers, children, elderly, disabled. It's those types of populations. Well, what Obamacare does is it makes it to where healthy adults are then added to that population as well. And so now they're fighting for those services with healthy adults and at-risk populations. So instead of adding the healthy adults in there, what we did was, no, we're not going to add healthy adults. What we're going to do is we're going to provide the services to those that truly need them. We also increased the Medicaid reimbursement rates for hospitals. And so this was an investment of $45.2 million, and this is actually going to go straight into, when people use the talking point of, well, Obamacare will save our rural hospitals. Well, no, actually it won't. If you look in other states, rural hospitals have also closed in other states, even after they've expanded. And so just because they've expanded, it's not the cure-all. And so this, I think, is at least a better solution than what they're trying to provide. So this just basically breaks it down into terms of what the money will actually do as far as how it'll help people. So what we're doing is we're targeting it for reimbursement rates for providers and hospitals. It's directly addressing their financial needs faced by those individuals. And it'll often lead to, Medicaid expansion often leads to more government dependency, which I don't think any of us thinks actually solves the problems. This one I'm extremely excited about. age verification. So you don't see minors, children who are under the age of 18, going to strip clubs. You don't see them going into pornography stores. Why? It's because it's illegal, right? We have it in our laws to where morals and other things are not subject to minors to consume. Well, we think that pornographic materials online should fall into the same category. So what we did this year was we ended up passing a law that is very similar to what you've seen in about 7 to 8 other states now. Louisiana was the first to pass it, which says if you have content that is pornographic content on a site, and more than 25% of that site is pornographic content, there has to be an age verification process by a third party for who is accessing that site. And so what that means is if I'm a minor and let's say I was born in 2015 and I'm 9 years old, right? Well, and trust me, I've heard testimony where there's 9 and 10-year-olds who are becoming addicted to porn now. And so they do have access. And so if I am a child that is 9 years old and I try to access that type of website now moving forward, it will prompt me for a photographic ID or a ID that proves that I am as old as I say I am. So it's not this, I'm sure you guys have all probably visited websites where it just says, hey, what is your birthday? And if you I'm going to type in 1930, and I was born in 1930. Well, it has no clue. It's just going to say, okay, cool, you're old enough. Come on in. Well, with this, the third-party service is actually going to check that ID to make sure that that individual that is accessing that content is of at least 18 years or older. And so I think that what we've already seen in other states is that the consumption of pornographic materials by minors has plummeted. And so I think this is going to have a lot of good for our society. And ultimately, the governor, she didn't sign it, but she allowed it to become law without her signature. So that was at least a positive. But you would think that this would be something that both sides can agree to. And actually in other states, we've seen large bipartisan majorities support this bill, this legislation. But, and you can see it on the slide here, 40-0 in the Senate, and then in the House, 92-31. So we even had some Democrats in our House that thought that they were trying to make arguments that, well, what about art? Art, like the ones that you see on the floor of the House ceiling, paintings of women with their breast exposed. That's art. Well, I think a lot of us can distinguish between art and what pornographic materials are. It's not necessarily defined per se in the law, but there was one Supreme Court justice at one time said, I know it when I see it. So I think that is something that's pretty obvious, and it's unfortunate that the vote ended up the way it was. But I'm glad that we made a lot of progress on this issue this year and got it passed. I want to say thanks to Jeff's group, by the way, for that. So, Kansas Family Values, Kansas Family Voice. You guys keep changing the name. All right, appreciate it. All right, so there's another one that we passed this year that was a little bit easier as well, which ended up 123-0 and 38-1, which was the Protecting Vulnerable Adults from Financial Exploitation Act. And so this basically just says that if there's a large portion of money that's coming out from an elderly person's account, or they're wanting to make hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of purchases, or some really suspicious looking purchases, or whatever else is going on, and they have a financial advisor that's typically helping them, then that financial advisor, if it looks really suspicious to them, they can actually put a pause on it for a little bit and do a little bit more investigating and digging just to make sure that that person is not being taken advantage of. So this one's near and dear to my heart. This is the EMERGE bill, which stands for the Education Masters for Enhanced Readiness and Global Excellence program for the Air and Army National Guard. And so this legislation allows for our Air and Army National Guard members to obtain master's degrees at state of Kansas institutions. And so there's 100 slots available in the first year, and then the second year there's another 100 available slots for this program. So there's only 200, and that's where it's maxed out. The Adjutant General will actually select individuals from who apply, and we'll select those individuals to then go and attend this master's degree program. Upon completion of this program, actually when they sign up for it, they are then committing to an additional 4 years of service. So once they complete the program, at the end, after the final course has been completed and they get their degree, that is when their 4-year commitment then begins. And so while yes, we are expending money for individuals for their education, we are also still getting and basically purchasing an additional 4 years of service out of them. And education, from what the studies have shown, is one of the number one reasons why individuals will typically tend to join the military. And so with this additional education benefit, we expect to continue to see better recruitment and retention efforts within our National Guard. DEI, I'm sure that all of you have been tracking on this issue now for some time. So we actually got a DEI bill passed this year, and you go, well, wait a minute, how did that happen? Yeah, did you override? No, actually, the governor let it become law without her signature, which was rather surprising, actually. Because what happened was it was 81 votes in the House, yes, to 40 no, and 28 yes in the Senate to 11 no. And so we would have had to probably fight to potentially override in the House. There's a few people missing that day, but we would have had to try to figure it out because we have to get to 84 in order to pass an override. Well, the specifics of this are on the screen. As you can see, it prohibits anything that's saying that admission, aid, or employment in the educational institution or political beliefs or DEI statements. So it prohibits those items. So that if you are being hired by one of these institutions, it is based on your merit. It is based on what you have accomplished in life. It is based on, okay, well, have you done a good job? Should we promote you? Or should we bring you from a student on as a professor, a teacher's aide, whatever it is? It's not allowing it to where, hey, we want to make sure you believe the right thing before you come in and teach and indoctrinate children. Cybersecurity. So this one's been a lot in the news lately, as I think many of you have probably seen around, whether it's Wichita or other places. And I think it's only going to continue to get worse, unfortunately. The government, what I have seen, is not prepared, unfortunately, for this conflict. Because that's what it is, it's a conflict. Because we have foreign actors that are currently coming in, foreign actors and hacker groups that are coming in, and they have figured out a way to make a substantial amount of money. If I hack your system and I lock you out of your system, you pay me, ransomware, you pay me $2 million, $3 million, whatever it is, and I will give you your information back. Well, what we're now doing is we are now funding the governments that hate us. And when we do that, that's causing problems for us abroad, militarily, terrorism. It's contributing to a lot of extra things. And so when the FBI comes in and says, don't pay the ransom, well, it's because it's going to other illicit means that are meant to harm us. And I'm going to get back on the bill now. And so what we need to do is, and what we did was Senate Bill 291. It is a 5-year plan to basically get the state government on the right track to start securing all of our data. Because I can tell you I've seen the red binders that Legislative Post-Audit has, and it's scary. The reason why they're red is because they're confidential. They're not subject to Kansas Open Records Act requests. But the content that is in there, it's shocking on how poorly many of our government institutions are being run. Some of them are doing really well, but not all of them. And so what we're doing is we are now moving in a direction over the next 5 years to start trying to invest more money into cybersecurity and basically moving to what's called the NIST standards. And so the NIST is a group at the federal level. They basically write computer standards for standardizing technology. And so we are wanting to get to those to a certain level to at least make sure that we have minimum security in order to start protecting ourselves. And then after that, the goal is to go to that next step to where we are providing security that you all would expect us to actually have on your data. This is things like social security numbers, anything that the state holds. The courts were hacked this last fall, and they were down for 2 months because of a ransomware attack. And so that is one of 3 branches of government that was taken offline for 2 months. And those are services that impacted foster care, impacted child support payments, impacted all sorts of things that are services that we need in order to operate and function as a society. So very thrilled about this one. Still a lot more work to do though, because even though we passed it, it's still going to require tweaks over the next 5 years in order to make sure that we implement it correctly. Civil asset forfeiture reform, Senate Bill 458. So this made it to where, again, it was a compromise piece of legislation. Law enforcement and civil liberties groups came together, worked together, and ultimately ended up compromising because we knew we had a broken system, and where somebody could basically get pulled over and their property could be confiscated, and then basically they would be very limited on options on what they could do to get their property back in a timely manner. And at that point, arguments were being made by one side that it was policing for profit. And so if I can pull you over, and if you have $100 of cash on you, I can, if I say that you are doing something illicit with that $100 of cash, it is now mine. And so then I can use that money to then now buy new police cruisers, so on and so forth. So that is what one side was arguing. The other side was saying, no, this is a service that we are providing for our communities to make sure to keep drug money and everything else off the streets. Well, we needed to find that balance. And so that's what this bill did. And it passed 120 to 0 and 35 to 0. So it was bipartisan support across the board. And so I'm very thrilled about this one too, to see where it ends up taking us in the next several years. Bain's Law. This one was dumbfounding to me, confusing to me. So there's a police canine here in Sedgwick County named Bain. He went in after a bad guy into a small confined space and was unfortunately killed. Now, because that happened, we passed a law that said that these animals are protected the same as our law enforcement officers. They are doing law enforcement activities, they are protecting our communities, and they should have the similar protections. Now, we passed it, the governor vetoed it, and this includes horses and dogs, and all it was basically doing was saying, hey, we're enhancing the penalties, and if anybody inflicts harm upon these animals or kills them, that they then have to provide restitution and all the veterinary costs or training costs to replace said animal. I think that is reasonable. It is very reasonable. However, the governor vetoed it, and we were fortunately easy to override that one. But as you can see, though, there was a number of Democrats that after the governor vetoed it, they changed their votes because she vetoed it. And you're going to see that trend again later when it comes to taxes, by the way. So irreversible gender transition surgeries. So there's actually 2 bills that we passed this year that unfortunately did not make it across the line. It is something that we're starting to get into the veto section. I don't know if you guys picked up on that yet, but Senate Bill 233 was where both House Bill 2791 and House Bill 2792 were both placed inside of it as part of the conference committee report. 2791 specifically prohibits hormone therapy and puberty blockers for minors 18 and under. Gender transition surgeries for 2792, 18 and under. We're saying if you are a minor, these are things prohibited to you. If you're 18, go ahead. If that's what you want to do to your body, feel free. But not when you're at the age of 18. And what's shocking to me is that last year, unfortunately I wasn't there to vote on this because my daughter was being born, but that's not unfortunately, that's a good part. Anyway, so my second daughter was born, and the vote for Tobacco 21 took place in the legislature. And what's I guess irritating to me about this is that you're either an adult at 18 or you're not. And so when the age got raised from 18 to 21, it's because they're not responsible. And the arguments were it's because they're not responsible enough. They shouldn't be allowed to consume tobacco. It's harmful to their health. Governor Kelly signs it, right? Well, come forward to this year, and, well, kids ages 9, 10, 11, 12, sure, go ahead. Make permanent changes to your body because you're mature enough to make that decision. but yet they're not mature enough to be able to determine if they can smoke. So you can see that there's a disconnect in the logic here when it comes to these debates that we are currently having on this issue. And it's extremely unfortunate. And it's about protecting minor children because, yeah.
Can you get a tattoo if you're under 18 legally?
Yes and no. It depends. I think you have to have parent consent on that one. However, there are other things that aren't permitted. So you can't get married under the age of 18. You can at 16, 17. However, you have to have parents' consent here in the state of Kansas as well. Donation of blood is another one. There are other things, tanning beds. We don't allow you to tan in the state of Kansas unless you're the age of 18 because of the health risks. So wait a minute, if we're not going to let them tan, but we're going to go let them take off their body parts or prevent them from maturing in a natural way, well, you can see the logic gap here, right? So it's important that we protect our children. It's important that, and actually what I was getting ready to say was, there are many instances now where children go through these procedures or processes and then a few years later say, well, no, never mind, I changed my mind. Well, damage is done, right? And so if they're a 13-year-old and by the time they're 16, they change their mind, well, okay, well, where are we at now? We can't help you now. It's done. So 18, okay, if you want to do that to yourself at 18, go ahead. You're an adult. Anyway, we failed to override on this one. The Senate overrode with 27-13. However, the House, originally we had the 84 votes, but then there was 2 members who changed their vote. 2 members on the Republican side that changed their votes. So maybe next year we will be able to pass this bill because we were extremely close. All right, foreign adversaries. There's 3 bills here that I want to talk to you guys about, foreign adversary legislation that we took up this year. The first one is the drone bill, which was moved into Senate Bill 271. It basically said over the next 5 years, the state government, municipal governments, we are going to transition and move away from purchasing or keeping Chinese manufactured drone. And the problem with this, I'm sure as many of you know, is that there's a company out there that services and produces quite a bit of the drones that are currently used within the United States. And this Chinese manufacturer is called DJI. DJI is currently prohibited from selling to the federal government, DOD, and the FCC has also come out against them and saying, hey, these aren't something that we should be playing with. But yet, we have individuals within our body that say, go for it. It's fine. If the federal government, who typically tends to deal with the foreign federal affairs, and China, them doing the stuff that they're doing these days, says that, this probably isn't something that we should be playing with, well then I think that we should probably, take that signal and go, okay, you know what, let's go ahead and phase these out and do either American drones or drones that are made in countries that are more friendly. Israel, Canada, whoever makes them. But we need to stop giving an intel picture to the people who are potential enemies moving forward. The Senate failed to override on this one. The governor vetoed it. It's unfortunate, but I could foresee this one coming back next year as well. House Bill 2711. This one actually passed. This is the Foreign Divestment Act. And so what it does is it says countries like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, those countries are what we're calling countries of concern. And our CAPERS dollars, which are the public retirement pension dollars for the state of Kansas, are currently invested throughout the world, right? Well, when the Russia-Ukraine war kicked off, we actually had a few $100 million sitting in Russia invested. Well, once once that kicked off and all the sanctions and everything else started going into effect, we basically lost that money. That is money we will not get back. And so if we are looking at potentially another conflict, but potentially with China, with the Taiwan situation going on right now, it is not a good idea for us to keep hundreds of millions of dollars in China. And so over the next 2 years, the Capers Board is going to be removing those funds slowly but surely from China. The upside is last year when we passed our ESG bill, after we passed it, the Capers Board actually already started to divest from China. So we had about $500 million, if I recall correctly, in China. This year, the number is closer to about $200 million. And so we've already significantly removed some of the money from there, but over the next 2 years, we will continue to remove the money from China as well. This passed overwhelmingly, both sides, and the governor actually allowed it to become law. Land purchasing. So this has been a hot topic, I'm sure, as you guys well know lately. So this one, unfortunately, failed to make it across the line. The governor vetoed it, but we didn't have the opportunity because of some behind-the-scenes maneuvering, or we couldn't get the votes on certain nights, that type of thing, and so we weren't able to pass it until veto session. And what happened was, after we passed it in veto session, we did not get the opportunity to override. What this one said is that if these countries of concern try to purchase land within 100 miles of a U.S. military installation, it would be prohibited. Some people out there go, well, wait a minute, why 100 miles? States like Florida are doing like 10 or 15, and all these other states are doing 10 or 15 miles. Well, I will just briefly hit on this. So I'm currently serving in the Air National Guard, and one of my duties is to understand what our foreign adversaries are doing. Well, if I have a component that is trying to gain intelligence on you, it can go more than 10 or 15 miles. You're looking at more longer ranges as far as intelligence gathering items. And so that's the reason why our legislation here in the state of Kansas was at 150 miles to begin with, was because I actually went to the intelligence community and said, hey, what should that distance be? And they said, it should be 150 miles from a military installation. And I said, okay, you guys are the experts. Let's do it. Well, during negotiations, it dropped to 100, and so I went and talked to them, and they said, well, 100 is still good. It's better than 10 or 15. Okay, well, then we'll take what we can get. So that's the reason why you see the 100 miles here in the state of Kansas, and honestly, all the other states should be doing the same. Anyway, so there, as you can see here on the PowerPoint, it lays out the process of, hey, the Attorney General had the ability to basically, after court proceedings and everything else, file court proceedings to where these countries are concerned, if it is found that they own businesses or have land within a restricted area, that the divestment process would then begin. The Abortion Coercion Act. So this one creates a new crime, and it basically says, don't coerce people to have abortions. It's as simple as that. And unfortunately, it was controversial. The governor vetoed it, and we were actually able to override. And so it said, hey, don't try to force people to have abortions if they don't want to. And if you try to do this on a minor under the age of 18, then the penalties are actually increased, because that's even more unacceptable that you're trying to put that much pressure on a minor if that's a decision that they don't want to make. The REINS Act. So this one is a stellar piece of legislation that we got passed this year. It reins in, same cute name, reins in the federal government, and it has an acronym for it too. But anyway, so it reins in the state government as far as rules and regulations authority. If a state agency is going to pass a rule and regulation, which basically has the full force and effect of law, because in the state of Kansas in 1984, there was a Supreme Court decision that was made that says once the legislature passes a law and gives it over to the governor and the administration, it is now their authority. The legislature, you no longer have any authority over what they're doing. And so if we want to basically do anything rule and regulation wise, we have to pass another law that says, no, that's not what we meant, or no, you can't add this, or no, you can't do that. And so there's no ability for us to basically say, hey, pause, that's going to really harm a lot of Kansans. You shouldn't do that. We're their representatives. And so that is why we passed the REINS Act. The REINS Act is saying that over a 5-year period, if your rule or regulation agency, if your rule or regulation is going to cost more than $1 million to implement, or to follow as far as economic-wise, then at that point, it triggers it to where the legislature actually has the ability to say no. And so that's going to be really, I think, helpful as we move forward in these out years. Abortion data reporting. So House Bill 2749. This one was also vetoed. We are basically asking questions, and people can refuse to answer the questions. But when they are at the doctor's office and they're seeking an abortion, all we're simply asking is, okay, why? We just want to know why. And so that we can then make better informed decisions as legislators, as the people's representatives. And actually, as a matter of fact, on the House floor, when Representative Landwehr went down and carried this legislation, the Democrats are doing their thing, obviously. But when she came down there and started talking about the reason why we need data, what was great was that she actually used the Guttmacher Institute in their own words. Well, the Guttmacher Institute, ladies and gentlemen, is a Planned Parenthood funded item. And so the Guttmacher Institute says we need all the data that we can get in order to make informed decisions about abortions and everything else. And so, well, I guess in that sense, we have the same reasoning and logic as the Guttmacher Institute. We just want the data too. Let's look at it. Why are people getting abortions? What can we do policy-wise to potentially help people in their time of need? We've funded various things like pregnancy crisis centers. And is there other means or methods that we can do in order to, hey, if it's resources you need, what resources is it that you need that we can help provide to potentially lower the abortion rate in the state of Kansas? Adoption savings accounts, vetoed. Yeah. So, but we overrode it. So this one was, the biggest nugget of this was creating an adoption savings account, making it to where people can save for adopting a child. It's very expensive, and it's very similar to how we do the First Time Home Buyers Act here in the state of Kansas. And you can put money into it, and then you can actually get a little bit of a tax credit back off of it because you're saving and you're going to be adopting a child. Most likely the reason why the governor vetoed this legislation was because of the Pregnancy Resource Act that was also inside of it. It establishes a new tax credit for contributions made to qualified nonprofit pregnancy centers and residential maternity centers, incentivizing donations by allowing a tax credit of 70% of the contributed amount, which is then carried forward for 5 years. So she doesn't want to incentivize people to donate to these pregnancy resource centers, is basically what that amounts to. All right, now we're going to get into the big enchilada and talk about taxes. Let me see how much time I got. Oh my gosh, I'm almost out of time. Okay, I sincerely apologize. All right, this does not include the tax bills that we passed from 2023. So I'm just going to try to stick to the tax bills that we did this year. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quick so that we can try to get to the questions and answers as quickly as I can. So the first tax bill passed on January 18th and was presented to the governor on January 26th. This tax bill had a single income tax rate that was tied to it. It was at 5.25%. It also immediately removed Social Security income taxes. It raised the residential exemption from $43,000 to $100,000, and it moved up the food sales tax. One of the things that I want you guys to realize or look at across these slides is how similar these tax plans, for the most part, are. There were little tweaks that were made to them, but overall, they are fairly similar as we continue to progress. And by the time you get to the last one, it is just little tweaks on the end for what determines how much the rates are. So we failed to override on this tax bill on March 27th. And so what happened was there was a senator who basically came over to the House side and told House members, hey, don't vote for this. We want you to vote no on this. I know you voted for it the first time, but I don't want to vote on it, basically, is what this amounts to, or I don't want to vote to kill the override. So just go ahead and speeden up the process a little bit, kill it on your side, and that'll allow us to maybe look at a new tax bill. So that's what happened. They killed it. And so we basically moved into a different strategy and a different plan at that point in time. Senate Bill 300 is what the next option was for the House. And so we presented that as an option. It was a two-bracket system. that was made. And a lot of the things were similar. So $100,000 for property tax relief, sales tax exemption on food removed by January 1st. So the Senate ended up working with the governor a little bit more closely than I would have probably have liked at this point in time, because it was still, they were, I think, willing to give away the farm, in my personal opinion, by doing three tax brackets. However, what was fantastic, though, and I will give the Senate a lot of credit on this, is that what happened was when they sent us their package, the House was like, yeah, no, we're not going to accept this. And so we actually went back to conference and we worked together as a team, and we produced an amazing tax package that we then sent to the governor. Now, if anybody wants these slides after the fact, I can definitely share them with you so that you guys can get all the information, because I am going through this rather quick now. I apologize. So the House, we had dropped the property tax rate for the school levy on mills. There's a 20 mil property tax across the entire state. That's the only property tax that the state of Kansas collects. We dropped it from 20 to 18 mils. The Senate dropped it from 20 to 19 mils, so we ultimately agreed on 19.5 mils. Social Security tax was the same. Sales tax was basically the same. Removing the local ad valorem tax, we had the same position on. Anyway, so I'm going to press. We come up with House Bill 2036 as a compromise between both the House and the Senate. The House passes this bill 119 to 0. Not a single Democrat voted no. And this actually happened twice. So before we even got to 2036, Senate Bill 300, we did the same thing, unanimous support for a tax bill. That is unheard of. There's people who I talked to up there that have been around for a while and watched legislatures for 30, 40 years. They'd said they'd never seen a unanimous tax bill. That's how amazing this was. The Senate, well, Laura Kelly comes from the Senate, so she has a lot of allies still in the Senate. So the 9 no votes that you see in the Senate for this bill are because Laura Kelly was talking to them and saying, hey, don't vote for that. So 24 yes, 9 no. The governor vetoes it. The House overrides. The Senate fails to override by 1 vote. By 1 vote. And so the 3 Republican senators that voted no are Dahl, Olson, and Pyle. Dahl and Olson aren't running for re-election. I think all you know who Dennis Pyle is. And if not, well, I'll talk to you after. So we get into the veto session, and then we decide to pass Senate Bill 37. So this is another tax bill that we're passing. And so the governor said the last one was too expensive. It was too expensive by $50 million, something like that. And so we go, okay. So we tweak the rates a little bit. We get within $3 million of what her perfect tax plan is, which is $425 million roughly. We get within $3 million of that. And these are all estimates, by the way. It's not perfect science, it's not perfect numbers. And they're looking 5 years out, which we've never done. We've only ever looked really 2 to 3 years out, because 5 years out, that's a lifetime in budgeting and taxes and trying to figure out how to make the government work. We've never looked 5 years out, but the governor has decided to start looking 5 years out when we started discussing this issue. Anyway, so we passed this bill, Senate Bill 37. We get within $3 million of where she wants to be. She vetoes it, and then she calls us back for a special session. Special session comes up, Senate Bill 1. We passed it on Tuesday. It's not a perfect plan by any means. It is a plan that we need to come back. We'll have to get some property tax relief for people, because this plan, we tweaked the numbers, and unfortunately every time we were unable to override. Every time we passed a tax bill, the tax relief got less and less and less. And that is because of 3 senators. And so we took what we could get, and that's pretty much where we're at. Now we're going to have to go to war next year, and we're probably going to see very similar types of actions out of the governor. She is probably going to continue to veto these tax relief bills that we're going to pass, but it's up to us to fight. It's up to us to try to get these bills passed. That's why it matters in these elections this year. If you want more tax relief on property taxes or any other kind of taxes that we're able to attack, these elections are going to matter, because they're trying to break our supermajority, and if they're able to do it, then for the next 2 years, the governor will basically be able to veto whatever she wants, and we can't do anything about it. So, all right, I have more, but I'm going to stop and take questions. I apologize.
Thank you, Blake. Thank you, Blake. And we have just a limited amount of time.
Yep.
If you want 2 hours worth, you can come back another time.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay, questions for Pachyderm members? We'll start right here.
Yes, sir. We have, well, put it simply, under the current abortion laws, can a person do gender selection? In other words, if they find a child that's in the womb of the mother is a girl and they want a boy, they can just abort the girl and then try again for a boy. So gender selection, is it legal in Kansas?
While it's not written down, and as far as the law goes, if somebody was trying to do that, then yeah, unfortunately it is legal. Because if that was a determining factor for that individual to go and get an abortion on what the gender was, there's nothing that prohibits that at this current point in time. And I don't know, I would have to ask an attorney about how Hodes and Nauser would play into something like that as well.
Life is getting awfully complicated. Bills. 2023, how many bills actually passed, went on the books in Kansas compared to like 30 years ago?
That's a great question. So I don't know the 30-year ago answer. However, I do know the last biennium answer. So of the roughly, I believe it was 2,000, was it 2,000 bills? No. It was last biennium, I had the number about a couple months ago. Okay, so last biennium, it was about 1,200 or 1,300 bills that were introduced. Of those, 100 of them became law in the first year, and then the next year it was about another 100. So you might have about 1,000 plus bills that are introduced in a session, and of those, you only have about 100 that become law. That's basically what I've seen over the last several sessions.
But the uptick is from 30 years ago.
I'd have to go back and look to see what the uptick is, but I would also say that, like, so for instance, the governor has used her veto pen more in modern history than any other governor. She actually vetoed over 40 items this year. But it's not the record in history, but like when we look back to how they used to do it back in, I think it was the 1930s or 40s, there was a governor that actually had more vetoes, but according to our research department, they were like, yeah, but they used to do the process different back then, and so that's why there's more vetoes. So,
with the huge surpluses that are in the state coffers, how can she justify not giving tax relief?
I can't answer for the governor. I can't. I mean, we're sitting on basically $1.7 billion in the state's rainy day fund, and then we're sitting on about another $3 billion in excess revenue funds within the state general fund. And so when we cut $300 million, I mean, we're still overtaxing people. We're still bringing in too much money. And I think that you can see that in the state consensus revenue estimates that came out in April. We brought in an extra $100 million. So next April, I'm sure that if we continue to see those types of numbers, we're still overtaxing the population. That's what that means.
Okay, Blake, here.
Mr. Carpenter, you mentioned financial exploitation of elderly people.
Mm-hmm.
When you say elderly people, at what age do you think is elderly? The second question is, how much money they have to lose before you could reimburse them? If someone loses $10,000, are you going to reimburse that person $10,000?
It's not about reimbursing. It's about prohibiting or slowing down the process of giving the money over to the bad actors. So it's not about necessarily reimbursing people. It's about, hey, is there a way that we can slow down this transaction to catch the bad actors before that money is given to them? And as far as your question on who's considered elderly, that's yeah, I got to be careful on that one. I would say as long as somebody has the mental capacity to be able to transact, then go for it. But as soon as somebody ends up with some mental deficiencies and they're able to be tricked, then at that point is when their financial advisors should know their client and then should also be able to help them better.
The other question is about, I read recently Instagram, there are some, teenage girls, boys, showing nude pictures. What can you do to prevent those things happening?
What was the question? Instagram? Yeah, so I would say that first of all, when it comes to social media, we all should take precautions, especially when it comes to our children, and probably not. I mean, you need to be active and involved in your child's life to where you don't just give them free range on social media, the internet in general. And so I think that what needs to happen is that there needs to be parents' involvement in their child's consumption of data. And for me, I mean, if that was the case, I wouldn't let my kids have Instagram until, okay, you're 18, okay, you're an adult, do what you want. Not really, but.
You said that DEI is not allowed in higher education now. Can we get that for the whole school system next year?
Well, we can.
This will be your last question.
Well, we can sure try. But there's going to be a lot of legislation this next year. There's always things that come up during the interim that we're always working on. So whether it's more items concerning DEI, taxes, firearms, abortion, all these things are going to come back again next year. Those are always the hot topic issues. And so definitely make sure to talk to your candidates this summer and fall. Make sure you know where they stand on the issues. And thank you all so very much for your time today. Appreciate it.
House Speaker Pro Tem, Representative Blake Carpenter.